Welcome to Federation Commander tutorial number 2, Sequence of Play. One thing I forgot to mention in the last video was that these ship cards are actually double-sided. This is the squadron scale side. This is where the most detail can be seen. On the back side is what's called fleet scale. And everything on this side is approximately 1/2 of what it is on the squadron side. So there's half the shields, half the number of weapons you notice here. The front shield's only 15, there's only 2 photon torpedoes. And on the squadron side, the front shield is 30 and there's 4 photon torpedoes. So if you're playing a scenario, for example, with lots of ships, maybe 4 versus 4, something like that, and you don't want to have to manage so many boxes on each ship, you can use the fleet scale. And it plays exactly the same, and everything scales really nicely. So, sorry I forgot to mention that. So, sequence of play. I'll start with a high-level overview of that. The chart actually is quite large here, but it's not as complicated as it looks. There's 3 main sections to it. There's the energy allocation, where you make decisions about how to spend your initial energy for the turn. And then there's the impulse phases. This description here for Impulse 1 is basically repeated 8 times. This is where the meat of the game occurs. This is where you do all your tactical stuff. And each one of these is broken down into 4, what they call subpulses. I'll just call them steps. And it's nice that the chart is actually laid out like this, because it allows you to move a marker along, and so you don't lose your place when you get into some complicated fights. And then there's the end of turn, which is where you do the cleanup for stuff that happened during the turn to begin the next turn. And that's just repeated over and over until the scenario ends or until all the enemies destroyed or whatever. So before I start the energy allocation phase, I need to talk a little bit about what energy is and what the energy pool is. If you notice on this ship, like I said before, these blue boxes here are energy producing systems. These are warp on both sides. This is reactor, this is impulse. And then these dark blue boxes are battery. So with a fresh ship like this, all these boxes produce 1 point of energy at the beginning of the turn. And you can see here, right on the card, it says, undamaged ship has 36 energy and plus 4 for the batteries. The game actually comes with counters that you can use that have numbers on them to keep track of your total energy that you have, and so as you spend it, you can just discard, make change for these counters. What I've done is I've bought a set of dice that I use to do this. So here I have 40 points of energy, and I will update this pool of energy as the turn goes on. So, what happens during energy allocation? In secret, you decide the base speed of your ship. That is typically 8, 16, or 24, but it can be 0. It can also be stopped. We'll talk about all this in the movement video. You can also pay to preload weapons. Now what that means is that some weapons like phasers and disruptors you just fire them when at the moment you want to fire them, you spend the energy and it's done. But some weapons take multiple turns to charge up. Photon torpedoes and plasma are examples of this. Photon torpedoes take 2 turns to charge, and plasma takes usually 3. And so it's at this moment that you would actually allocate energy for that preloading or loading on the turn that you're going to fire them. You can also pay to regenerate shields. It costs 2 for every 1 point you're going to regenerate. So this is actually very expensive because it costs way less energy to destroy shields than it does to regenerate them. So you would normally only do this if there was some desperate tactical situation where you had to either bring a shield up that was down, or you just needed to reinforce it because it was a turn where you weren't expecting to spend a lot of energy otherwise. And you can also continue tractor beams that you had in place from the end of the previous turn, and I'll talk about that in a much later video. So let's say, for example, that on this turn, let's say the first turn of a scenario, that I choose to move my ship at a speed of 16. On this ship, the cost is 1-to-1. If I'm moving 16, the cost is 16. If I'm moving 8, the cost is 8. So let's say I chose to move 16. So I'll mark that on here. I'll just put a little X there to say that's my chosen speed. And then I also choose, here's the chart for preloading torpedoes. I choose to preload all 4 of my photon torpedoes. Each of these, and we'll talk about this in a future video on weapons, each of these boxes costs 2 energy. So I've just spent a total of 24 of my 40 energy. So I'll get rid of these dice. I now have 16 energy left to spend for the whole rest of the turn. Now we would go through each of the impulses one at a time. And just to give you a little bit of overview of that, because I've chosen to move speed 16, I will move twice in every impulse. So over the course of 8 impulses, I will have moved 16 hexes on the board, approximately. Okay. During the impulse, you will have the option of accelerating at the beginning of the impulse, decelerating during the steps of the impulse, and then potentially taking defensive fire actions, offensive fire actions, operating your shields, transporters, and tractor beams, and then launching seeking weapons. And you'll do that 8 times in a row over the course of 8 impulses. And so let's say that during those 8 impulses that I've spent 14 of my energy. So I have 2 energy left at the end of the turn. So now you notice on my ship card I have 4 batteries. So during the end of turn phase, we will take any energy left over at the end of the turn, and I can put that back into my batteries. So I have 2 energy, and I have more than enough batteries to support that energy. So I will carry over those 2 for the next turn. So that means that instead of 36 plus 4 next turn, I will have 36, but I'll only have 2 batteries. So I'll start next turn with 38 energy. And let's take that a step further, just to make a point here. Let's say that 3 of these boxes were destroyed during that turn. So now my base energy for the ship is only 33, because I've lost 3 units of energy that I'm producing, and I can only store 2 leftover energy from this turn. So I'll start with 33 plus 2, or 35. So in that one turn, I might have gone down 5 energy. So now maybe I can't move as fast as I want to, or I can't charge all the torpedoes I want to, or I won't be able to fire other weapons, etc. So that would be putting my unused energy back into my batteries. At this point, you also have the option of overloading. You're taking energy you still have left and overloading certain weapons, and I'll talk about overloading in the combat section. You'll mark all the weapons that you fired on your card. You'll unmark them so that you know that they're available to be fired again. You do some stuff like use your labs and have marine combat if you've beamed marines over to the enemy ship. And then you can start repairing stuff on your ship and do ship docking and undocking and takeoff. So that's the overview of the sequence of play, and next video will be all about movement. Thanks for watching.